Hi, I'm Zoe from Zoebakes and welcome to my kitchen. We're gonna make a sourdough starter, and this process can take several days, even up to 2 weeks. It kind of depends on the environment, on the flour, on the water, on the sourdough starter's mood. So don't get discouraged if this takes more than a week, because sometimes it just does. There's a couple of things that I have found that are very helpful in terms of getting a sourdough starter to take, because essentially what we're doing is we're just combining flour and water and attracting the natural yeasts in the environment. And that is it. That is all that a sourdough starter is. Use organic flour and use filtered water. Those are the two things that I think make the biggest difference. If you're using flour that has a lot of chemicals added to it, that's bleached even, it's not going to work as well or as quickly, and it may not actually work at all. So organic, all-purpose flour is the base of this. The filtered water, same exact reason. You don't want chlorine and all of the other things that they're putting into tap water to go into your starter, because it can inhibit or even kill the natural yeast that you're trying to attract. So having said all that, we're just going to mix together equal parts organic flour. So I'm going to take 50 grams of flour. Okay, so 50 grams of flour and then 50 grams of water. Oop, okay, very close. I'm 3 grams off. That's going to be just fine. And then I'm just going to stir that together. I like to use a little rubber spatula because then I can scrape it off of the sides. Stir it together, just making sure that it's all uniformly wet. There aren't dry patches of flour. And then I'm going to cover it. I don't want to cover it entirely because I want some air to get down in there. Essentially, I want all those crazy little yeasts to find this and start doing their thing, feeding off of this flour. So I am gonna cover it, but I'm not, even though this is a mason jar and it comes with a twist top, I'm not using that. I am simply putting a lid of foil over the top. It can be snug because air can get down under there, and I'm just gonna leave this. I'm actually gonna leave this as it is for 2 days. So 50 grams of water, 50 grams of organic flour, cover it up, leave it at room temperature for 2 days, and we'll come back and we'll feed it and go from there. Okay, we are 48 hours later. So I mixed the flour and water together on day 1, skipped day 2, and now we're on day 3. And I just came home from the gym. I had planned to feed my starter later, but I got home and I couldn't quite believe how much this has risen already. I hope you can zoom in and see that. It is bubbling and active and kind of miraculous. Trust me, this does not always happen. I mean, 2 days and I have a semi-usable starter. That's not typical. This can take up to 2 weeks. I'm thinking maybe there's just like a crazy amount of yeast in the air in this kitchen, which kind of makes sense. So anyway, let's assume that you look at your starter on day 3 and it hasn't done much. Totally normal. Do not be freaked out. This is the freak. This is just bizarre. I don't think I have ever seen this before. What I'm gonna do now on day 3 is I'm gonna do the exact same thing I did before. I'm gonna add my flour, the organic all-purpose flour, 50 grams of that, straight to the same jar. This one's so crazy active that I hope this all fits in this jar. This is really quite something. This is the absolute thing that I love about baking, is every time it's a little bit of a surprise. So you would think, having done this for so many decades, that I would have seen everything. Not so much. Okay, I am going to add equal parts of my flour and water to the jar, just like I did the last time. All of this will be written out, linked below, so don't worry about memorizing anything. And then I'm just gonna stir it together exactly the way I did before. I'm gonna cover it up and we will come back and take a look at this tomorrow. Who knows what we'll see tomorrow. Hi, we are now on day 4 of our sourdough starter. Kilo is here to help me out. Hi, puppy. And the starter looks entirely different than the last time we checked on it. And it is just, you know, it has a personality of its own. So last time it had risen up kind of miraculously and in a way I hadn't exactly anticipated. This time it rose up. You can see the line right here of where it rose, and then it deflated again, which is what it's gonna do, because those air bubbles get so huge and weak that they pop and collapse. And then it also may separate. So you might see this little line here where you can see some liquid, and that's all normal. So this is day 4 of our starter. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to stir this up so that it's more uniform. Get that liquid mixed back into it so it's nice and uniform. It's gonna pop all those bubbles, and that's fine. The puppy is trying to get into his food. I'll be right back. So I stir it up, I get it nice and uniform, and now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pour out half of it. And the reason that I'm doing that is because if I just kept adding and adding and adding to this jar, I'm gonna end up with like a gallon of starter, and I just don't want that much. So we're gonna put that over here, and then we're gonna take our jar and we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're gonna add our 50 grams of flour and then 50 grams of water. And then we're gonna stir it and we're gonna let it sit and do its thing again. And we're gonna continue this process until we get a really nice, bubbly starter. And it has a really great flavor. So the longer you go, the more intense that sourdough flavor is gonna be. When you start it, it's gonna be kind of subtle, and there's the puppy. This is the real life of Zoe's house. Okay, so that's it. Okay, cover it up. There we go, day 4. I'm on day 5 of my starter, and I actually have 2 going at the same time, and I wanted to show you some signs that things are not going so well. So I have 2 here. One looks really healthy. You can see that it has bubbles in it on the top. It does have some water that's separating at the bottom, but it's still alive. It still has the bubbles. There's still activity. This one's doing great. This one, it has the water that's separated, and the water is at the top. There's no bubbles going on in this floury sludge that's sitting at the bottom. I'm not gonna throw it out. I am gonna try to revive it, but I'm gonna treat it a little bit differently. So for the first one, I'm just going to do what we've always been doing. I'm going to add more flour and more water. You can discard some of it, or you can just add it to the whole thing. It kind of depends on how much starter you want. I'm gonna add flour right to this jar. We're gonna leave this, we're gonna deal with that in a minute. I'm gonna add 50 grams of flour. I have here all-purpose flour and I have whole wheat. So up to this point, we've only been using all-purpose, but you can mix and match the type of flour as long as you're using organic flour. It's totally fine. And in fact, sometimes if you have a lagging starter that doesn't seem that active or excited, adding a little bit of whole grain flour to it can actually help. It smells like sour and funky and earthy and all the things. So if you've never made a sourdough before and you smell it and it's like, this is funky as all get out, you're in the right direction. Okay, so some whole wheat, and then I'm gonna do the rest all-purpose. And then equal parts of the water. Okay, stir this. So this was the one that was doing really well. We're gonna stir this. We've got some whole grain in here, some all-purpose, some water. Stir it up and let it go for another day. Now we have to deal with the one that's not that excited. This one, I don't know what the issue is entirely. It happens. It happens to me. It happens to everybody. It may happen to you. It may not. But anyway, if it does, the first thing that I typically do with a starter like this is stir it up so that you're combining that water and the sludgy bits at the bottom. It smells right. It's funky. Okay, stir that up. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to put half of this starter into a new jar. You can weigh the whole thing and measure it out, but I'm gonna do it the non-scientific way. I just want a fresh start. So I put it in a new jar and then I add the ingredients. I add the flour and the water. I'm gonna do 50 grams of each. Again, you can do all-purpose or you can add the whole wheat or rye or buckwheat or brown rice flour, whatever you have around that you want to experiment with, as long as it's equaling about 50 grams. The different types of flour will make a difference in how thick your starter is, but not so much of a difference that you have to, let's put more all-purpose. As you can see, I'm not being terribly scientific about the ratio of the different flours, because sometimes I'll use all whole wheat or all-purpose. Whatever kind of flour you use, it's gonna feed that yeast. Okay, then my water, 50 grams. I use weights, even for the water, because that's how we typically bake in restaurants. If you want to use cup measures, milligram or milliliters would be the same, 50 milliliters or 50 grams, whichever you want. I don't know what it is in cups. I'll have to look it up. Okay, stir this up in the new jar, and then we are going to leave these, and hopefully that measure of switching the jar and feeding it is going to give this starter that was lagging a little bit some activity. So we have our 2 starters on day 5, 1 that was healthy and 1 that needed some help. So don't panic. We're gonna keep feeding these and see what we get tomorrow. So see you tomorrow. Okay, we're in day 6. I'm back to the 2 starters because I want to show you what happened from yesterday. This is the one that had the water and it was floating at the top, and the bottom was a little bit sludgy and didn't have a lot of bubble action in it. And I fed it anyway, and I have faith it's gonna come back to life. And it did, because I don't know if you can see this. It doesn't look awesome right now, I will admit, but it did rise up and then collapse again, which means that it had some yeasty activity in it. And so it's gonna work, but this one is gonna take its time, as opposed to this one was the one that also had some water separation, but you could see the activity, you could see the bubbles in it. And now it's nice and healthy and looks great. It's not separating. It's on its way to being usable. So today is day 6. I'm gonna feed this today, see what I get tomorrow. I might even be able to use it tomorrow, but I may have to go an 8th day or even a 9th. And then the longer you go, the more intense the flavor, the sour is gonna be. And so I'm gonna deal with this one first, and then we're gonna come back to this one and fix that one. Okay, so this is the one that's really nice and healthy. It's got all kinds of bubbles in it. It's no longer separating. It looks great. So I'm gonna pour this off. This jar has done its duty. I'm gonna pour about half of my starter into a fresh jar. You can get very precise with the measuring. I don't. I'm just gonna sort of eyeball it, and I give you permission to do that. Totally depends on your personality. I have great luck eyeballing it, and other people want to be way more precise than that. So this is going to end up being about 50 grams of starter in each jar. And then I'm going to, so this is the old jar. This is now what we call discard. I can use it in other recipes, or I can literally discard it into my compost bin. That is up to you. There are plenty of recipes online for sourdough discard, making waffles and pancakes and all kinds of things. Now I'm going to feed the stuff that's in the new fresh jar. So 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of flour, probably 49 because I missed the jar a little bit. And then 50 grams or 50 milliliters, same thing, or about a 1/4 cup of water. And we're gonna stir that all together and let it rest. Okay, so that one is now day 6 complete, ready to watch it, see where it goes. Now we're back to the one that's having some issues. This one is still separating, which means that it's, you know, it's not exactly as healthy and active as I'd like it to be. And it also means that it probably needs a little more flour to bring it back into, I guess, emulsion, you know, so that everything is in balance. If you have a lot of liquid, this is not a ton of liquid separating out, but if you have liquid separating out, you can typically add a little bit more flour than water in the next feeding. Okay, so we're gonna put a little bit more flour. Now, if you're using something like rye or buckwheat, it has less gluten in it. It's not gonna absorb as much water. And so you may get this separating a little bit more because it's not absorbing as much of the water. So you may have to add a little bit more flour to dry it out a little bit. This jar I changed yesterday. it's probably just fine. I don't think it's the jar that's causing the issue, so I'm just gonna dump it right back in there. If you wanna be super careful, you can get another jar. But I think just feeding it and reducing the amount of water by like 10 grams is gonna do it for me. So just a little bit. Oh, and I did not take out half of this. Okay, so we're gonna have just a ton of starter in this one. It's fine. So me making some mistakes like that of not pouring out or discarding some of the starter just goes to show you sort of how, you know, you don't have to be totally rigid about this method. It just means I'm gonna have a lot of starter in here. And because I have a high ratio of starter to the flour, it's probably gonna take a little bit longer for this to rise than that one that has a higher, I've fed it more flour. So now I have a nice thick starter. I really think we're gonna get someplace with it. Obviously, you can mark it, like put a rubber band around the starting point to see if it grows. I'm gonna throw a rubber band on that real quick so that we know where we started, especially since now they don't have the same amount of starter in them, so that you can see when we come back tomorrow. I'll be right back. Okay, so we have day 6, the healthy starter, and day 6, the one that had some issues, and we'll come back on day 7, so the full week, and see what we've got. So I'll see you tomorrow. Today is day 7, and we definitely have some progress. This one, you can see where the rubber band started, and now it has gone up past the rubber band, way past. It actually went up to here and is already starting to collapse on itself, which is, again, totally normal. This one is super healthy, on its way, and I'm gonna feed it, and I could probably use it tomorrow. So like I've said, the longer you go, the stronger that sour flavor is going to be. So I can probably use it tomorrow, but it probably won't be as complex as I want. This one, even though, you know, I had added more flour and water to the starter without discarding any. So the rubber band started up higher. You can see it didn't go very far above the rubber band, but there is hope. There is lots of activity going on. It's not big bubbles. It's not super active. I wouldn't be able to make a loaf of bread with it yet, but there is hope. So if you see these tiny little bubbles starting to appear in your starter, it's not separating anymore. So that too is a good sign. I'm just gonna keep going. This, I would say, is the equivalent of maybe day 4 of a starter. So just keep feeding it. And like I said in the beginning, this can take 7 days or this can take 2 weeks. So it really depends on the environment, the temperature, so many things. So do not get frustrated. It is a living experiment. So just keep feeding them, keep caring for them, and they will come together. This is one of those activities that I feel like is excellent to do with kids because they can see taking 2 ingredients like flour and water, adding them together, and all of the natural yeast and bacteria just from the atmosphere are going to create something that is alive. It's so cool. And then you can bake bread with them. So off I go. I'm just gonna keep feeding them, keep caring for them. Watch my sourdough bread video to learn how to, once you have your starter, make a loaf of bread. So if you found this video helpful, please subscribe to my channel. Please tell all your friends about it and leave comments and tell me what other things you would like to bake. Thank you and happy baking.